Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm going to make some more friends today with a non-controversial topic. Yeah. I've received many times a question from viewers, also in emails actually. And what it is wives reaching out to me and basically saying, my husband, their wives reaching out to me, my husband won't go to the old mass. And in some cases, he just won't even hear it. He doesn't want to be that serious about religion, basically is how they put it. On the other hand, it is, we went, he didn't care for it, doesn't want to go back, doesn't want to talk about it. I'm going to talk about that issue because the question I'm asked is, what do I do as a wife? I'm supposed to be subject to my husband. This is the teaching of the church. This is in the scriptures. What do we do with this? And I'm also going to say, as we get into this, and please stay with me, that it's a real problem when a man has an issue with the traditional mass, with a traditional liturgy in general, and I believe it actually represents a grave defect in moral character, which I have reasons for. It's not just my rad-trad opinion. We're going to go to some basic principles about music and philosophy, the intellect, the state of the soul, essentially, and we're going to do that in just a second. But first, my friends, I would like to say thank you to the sponsor for this video, which is Queen of Victory Rosaries. You know Queen of Victory Rosaries. Christmas is 2 weeks away. If you order now, you can get some items. I'm here in Canada. When this kind woman sends me these to show on I don't have my rosary in my pocket right now. Sorry about that. Not being able to show you, but you can see them on the screen here. When she sends me a rosary, it takes about 2 weeks, and I'm international. Okay, it's funny when you send things from even just Michigan or some border state to Canada. There's the customs and all this kind of stuff. But in the States, it's much faster. So go to Queen of Victory Rosaries if you need a gift for that special someone. Many different custom rosaries. You can have rosaries made for you, whatever you want. There are 15-decade rosaries. I have one she sent me. It's absolutely beautiful. It looks a lot like this one. If we can just pull that up here. If it just loads for us. Internet's being slow. There it is. Looks a lot like that one. It's beautiful. Ours doesn't have the skulls, which is cool. Ours just doesn't have it. And anyway, everything you need is here. Use the coupon code Kennedy at checkout to get a discount. And also, if you're someone who doesn't like to use Etsy, no big deal. Just send her a note through the Etsy website, which is linked in the description to this video, and you can figure out another way to do the payment. Just before we continue, forgot one more thing. I'm just starting a series at my Substack. You can go to my Substack, which is linked in the description to this video or podcast, wherever you're watching or listening. If you just click that link underneath, I've just started a series for paid subscribers. I think it's $8 a month. You can pay for a year, which is $80 for the year. There's a founding membership option if you're feeling generous. But anyway, I've just started this Bible series. It's a 6-part series on the Bible. You can see I've just pulled it up here. And it's pretty extensive. I've done a lot of research on this over the years. I go through the history of it. It's pretty good stuff. Actually, I'm pretty proud of this work, if I'm being honest. And I think it's really helpful, especially with the new year coming up, making resolutions. Maybe your resolution is to read the Bible. And with every article, you will actually have audiobook quality audio narrated. And we can just listen to a quick sample of that here. Traditional Catholic Bible Catechism Series. Good day, all. I would like to introduce the first series available to paid subscribers of Mere Tradition. With the New Year fast approaching, doubtless there will be talk of resolutions and disciplines we all would like to adopt for the coming year. Anyway, you can see that there. This is pretty professional stuff. So sign up if you'd like to have access to that as well. Link in the description. Okay, let's get into the topic. So, what is a wife supposed to do when her husband won't go to the traditional mass? Is she supposed to just be obedient as the scriptures tell us? And that's that? And they just go to the Novus Ordo? Or is she allowed to not follow that way? Is this cause a problem? Well, we should probably think about a couple scriptural realities and what those mean before we even get into this. So there are a few places in the scriptures where it talks about being subject to your husband. You can see the word submit. You can see the word being subject. Similar meanings, obviously. Similar translations. In Ephesians, it's a very famous passage in I think it's the 5th chapter, around verse 21, 22, something like that. And there's also in Colossians, I believe it's in Colossians 3, chapter 3, verse 18, I think. Either way, it talks about being subject to your husband. Well, of course, St. Paul goes on to talk about the necessity of the husband leading the wife as the way that Christ leads the church. And St. Paul also does talk about being subject to one another. Now, that's the place where the post-conciliar New Springtime crowd loves to pretend that there's no such thing as actual headship of the husbands in the home. That's not true, because St. Paul in Ephesians, he talks about submit to one another, wives submit to your husbands, so on and so forth. The reason why we talk about this mutual submission is because there is a very real reality that both of us die to self for the other, and therefore there is a reality of submission. We can't avoid that. We have to die to ourselves for the good of our spouse, and that there is a subjection or submission to the needs out of love and kindness and Christian virtue, and this is very good. But in the actual economy of the home, there is this hierarchy of order, and this is baked into the cake. This is just the way the world works. You want to deny it, you can go try that feminism thing and see how it turns out. Doesn't really work that well, does it? Look where we are today. Women have been emancipated, so to speak, but they're also not having children, and they're miserable across the board, just like men are, because everyone's miserable because of their rejection of the way that the world is supposed to run. You can't put the wrong gasoline in a car and not expect it to break down. Follow the analogy, you can't put the wrong parts on the car and expect it to work properly. You have to do things with the way things are made, and this is how we're made. So, but then what does it mean when a wife wants to be a good Christian wife and wants to be subject to her husband, but her husband just simply won't go to traditional mass? What is she to do? Is she supposed to speak up about it? Is she supposed to say, I'm going there anyway? Won't that cause discord in the home? Well, now we have to understand what the nature of authority is, because really at the end of the day, this comes down to the nature of authority. Because also, I believe it's in Romans chapter 13, I think it's verse 1, where we are told that we are not supposed to rebel against a civil authority because all authority is from God. But I think we all understand that St. Paul is using an intellect where he can understand things in their fullness, and he's obviously assuming that we know that no one is required to do something they're told by an authority that would be wrong. On the other hand, or at the same time, or by the same token, whatever expression you want to use, I think we can all understand that St. Paul would understand that the civil authority can't stop us from doing what we must do if it is a necessary thing and is a good thing, or it's not lawful for them to. This is something that came up, obviously, during the COVID regime. This is a question people had to deal with a lot. What is obedience to the state? What is obedience to the hierarchy of the church? And I think people came to understand more than they have in a long time that there is such thing as a false obedience. And we could say, as part of that submission thing, which is obviously going to contain the virtue of obedience, there is such thing as a false aspect of obedience within submission. If a husband is telling his wife to do something where she would sin by doing so, she can't do it, for one. I mean, it's unlawful to do it from a sense of the moral law, but of course she's not required to do that. So these are the principles that one will have to think about when considering the liturgy. The husband does not have the authority over the spouse to harm her Catholic faith. Now, you may disagree with me that going to the Novus Ordo would harm someone's Catholic faith, and you can disagree with me on that. We're just dealing with the principles here. I'm not telling you how you must think about this one way or the other, but I've received this question many times, not just a few times, many times in the comments and emails, where wives just essentially are kind of up the creek without a paddle, as they say, and their husbands just won't man up and take them to the traditional mass, to a traditional liturgy in general. And while I can't comment on people's individual marital situations, and I'm not trying to, I think those principles I've spoken of here can help you make that decision. But also remember, we have a really great example to go off of in the saints. One of my favorite saints is St. Augustine. In fact, as part of the Third Order of the SSPX, the sort of religious name I took on, if you want to call it that, is Augustine. I just narrated the Confessions of St. Augustine by Anthony Esselin. You can find that wherever audiobooks are sold. I love St. Augustine. I adore St. Augustine. And I adore St. Augustine's mother, and I think he really adored her as well, as you can read in his book. St. Augustine's father was a very bad man. He was an adulterer, talks about that sort of thing. He did not perform his religious duties. He didn't get baptized till later in his life. he obviously had many good qualities. I shouldn't say he was evil or something. He had many good qualities. He cared about Augustine's education. He was, he had sort of natural virtues, but he was a pagan. And he sort of went as far as a pagan could go. But his wife was St. Monica, and she was a wonderful, amazing saint. And the way St. Augustine describes her marriage, there's one part that's very fascinating. Even though the husband did terrible things, which are obviously not justified. No one's justifying those, but she did terrible things. He did terrible things, excuse me. St. Augustine relays how when his wife would be in mixed company with other wives, and they would be complaining about their husbands, she would actually sort of, not ridicule, but sort of chastise them for doing that. And it really shocked them because they knew that her husband was as bad as theirs, and yet she would never speak ill about him. And Augustine talks about basically this heroic submission that she had is what saved her husband's soul. It's quite a beautiful story. Now, she never took part in the pagan rituals, and she never did not go to Mass, and she never compromised on her faith, far from it. But St. Paul shows us this in the Scriptures, that it is the wife's submission and holiness that is sort of the counterbalance to the, let's call it, misguided machismo or something like that. I'm trying to think of the right word. I can't really think of it right now. But whatever the problem is with the man sort of acting manfully but without the virtue, which causes a problem, it's actually this submission of this wife that brings the man back to God. She sanctifies the husband by doing so. Often it's with her tears, but this is why St. Monica is such a great saint. So for any woman that is in a position like that, I believe that she's probably the intercessor that you should probably be praying to as much as possible. Okay, now I'm going to go on to say why I believe there's actually something wrong with men in a moral sense when they don't like and won't go to an old liturgy. Define some terms. Moral sense. I don't just mean in the sense of, that person must be living in grave mortal sin. I'm not saying that. I'm not impugning that on anybody that I don't know. But moral encompasses the general formation of our character. Okay? So for example, if you say, is someone a moral man? Well, you wouldn't say, well, he's a good guy. He's not a murderer. Well, that doesn't make him moral. Just because you're not committing grave sins doesn't actually mean you're a moral man. So it has to be more than not committing grave sins. So sometimes traditionalists will be stereotyped as being only worried about the smells and bells. Traditionalists just like the incense and the Latin and the lace and the Saturnos and the chasubles and the nice artwork. And that's just their elitist thing. Well, there's two ways to respond to this. One, people will say, that's not true. This has something to do with my preference, which actually is an incorrect response, which I'll explain why. But the correct way is, no, you're right. I do love those things, and I won't allow myself, or I can't abide God being worshipped in any other way. That's the appropriate response. It is a matter of preference to decide to go to the traditional Mass instead of the Novus Ordo. But just because it's a matter of preference does not mean it's a valid reason, because what we prefer reflects our interior life. So if a man does not prefer the old Mass or an old liturgy, if he does not prefer it, then there is something, I would dare to say, something must be wrong with his interior disposition when it comes to his morals and his intellect and his, formation of character. I want you to imagine a scenario. Well, you've seen movies like this, right? I mean, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but we've seen 20 of them growing up. The kid who's in the ghetto and, maybe he's from the hood or something like that, and he discovers he wants to be a writer. Actually, there was that movie Finding Forrester. I don't know if it's good. I remember seeing it as a kid. It was Sean Connery and it was a black kid from the ghetto, and Sean Connery was the old curmudgeon writer. Anyway, basically someone who's from a bad situation, when they get themselves put into a position where they're going to be formed with the higher things of the intellect, of music, of art, of literature, this actually changes the person's character. And you see in these films or in these stories, if you read the books, where those who are in the lower places, those who are in the places where they don't appreciate those things, it actually aggravates them when the person does not want to be a part of the debased things. So for example, if you're from a culture where grimy hip hop music is very popular and that's what everybody listens to, and you walk in and you say, hey guys, would you like to listen to some Vivaldi? And you say, it's really great. I love Vivaldi. And they'll look at you like something's wrong with you. What, you got to stick up your butt? What's your problem? When people are in that place where they can't appreciate the finer things, they actually resent the things that are finer. And this is always linked to a problem in character. The more sinful people get, the less they're able to be virtuous, of course. And virtue means strength. Therefore, the less they're able to appreciate the things that represent the strength of what is good, true, and beautiful. Maybe you've had this experience when you started going to the old mass, and at the beginning, you were just very secular. Your top 40 was on in your car, your radio, you were watching kind of regular television shows. And then after you go to the old mass for, let's say, 4, 5, 6 months, you actually find that you can't appreciate those things anymore. That happened to me. I used to be a regular secular guy, and when I was going to the Novus Ordo, I wasn't living in mortal sin. I was going to confession and staying away from those grave sins by the grace of God. We were open to life. We were following the teachings of the church, but my taste in music, although I wouldn't listen to sort of explicit, like heinous lyrics, I was listening to like Christian inspired rock or rap. I would listen to country music, which is basically just pop music with a twang nowadays, let's be honest. I dressed normal, like in the sense of I didn't really think about modesty, wear a tank top or whatever, just kind of whatever guys wear in the summer. I didn't really think too much or as much about the company I would keep. I had inclinations where I thought, well, I don't want to hang out with so-and-so, but I just wasn't as, let's say there was something where I wasn't refined. And then I distinctly remember when we were discovering Catholic tradition, I was sitting on the living room floor with my 2 little boys at the time. We just had 2 kids. And before that, I was a coach when I was a high school teacher. And one of the great things about being a coach is you can basically wear a tracksuit every day because you're always wearing your team gear. And that's fine. I mean, okay, there's a time and a place for that. You don't have to coach in a 3-piece suit. You're going to get muddy or whatever on the fields in the spring. Okay. But I would pretty much wear that kind of stuff all year because if I'm being honest, it was just really comfortable. Why not? I remember sitting on the floor with my kids, and at that time they were like, 2 years old and 1 year old or something like that. And I remember saying to myself, just internally, I said, I have to start wearing suits to work. And I told my wife, I said, I have to wear suits to work. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, well, my boys are becoming of reason now, and they're going to see me coming home every day, basically wearing sweatpants, like a tracksuit, like a coach's gear. And they're going to think that grown men grow up to just basically wear the same stuff that they wear in their little onesies. And that's just not appropriate. I didn't have a long rationale for it. I said, there's something wrong with that. So I decided to just start wearing suits every day to work. And I did that. Casual Fridays, I might wear a golf shirt and khakis instead. I even started to coach in a suit. And actually, the players and other coaches thought it was great because it was the old school way or whatever. But there was a moment where, to be honest, it was the traditional faith that started to actually change my virtue. And you just really don't see this in the Novus Ordo world very much. And the reason is because the Novus Ordo world is not beautiful. The Novus Ordo world, the Novus Ordo liturgy is banal. It's not sacred. It doesn't have the same sanctity to it. Whenever you find one of those unicorn Novus Ordos in Latin, Ad Orientem with incense, it's always going to be at a parish where they also celebrate the traditional mass. And it's just, I don't know why they don't just do it both times. Maybe it's to, conform to some whims of a bishop or something. But in the world of traditional Catholicism, it's not just LARPing that men gravitate towards things like nice pipes or cigars or nice whiskey, jackets with tweed elbow patches, why they gravitate towards classical music, different types of literature and art. It's because your actual interior life completely changes and you can't appreciate the things that are profane anymore. You just can't. I heard some top 40 music the other day. I was in a store or something like that. And it sounds to me now, songs I probably would have liked 15 years ago. It sounds to me like the cacophony of the voices of demons in hell. I don't know how else to explain it. Every time I hear this ridiculous music, I cannot stand it. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I didn't do any, grand study in music or something like that. It's just one day I couldn't appreciate that stuff anymore because my interior life had changed because of Catholic tradition, specifically the traditional Latin Mass. Also, the traditional Latin Mass, it's very clear in the traditional Latin Mass that what is happening is an offering of a sacrifice for sins. It's a propitiatory sacrifice. It's difficult to go to a traditional Mass and not think about the idea of sin. Well, if someone is living in grave sin or has attachments to grave sin, they're going to want to avoid that. Also, in the Novus Ordo world, the lines between genders are completely skewed. Girl altar boys is a type of transvestite. They're dressing like a man. That's disordered. Women handing out the Holy Communion. No layperson should be handing it out, but especially women handing out Holy Communion. This is a woman pretending to be a priest. This is disorder. And this is a problem. If a man actually prefers that to the traditional Mass, then there must be in the home, there must be in his soul, there must be in his virtue, a problem of disorder. There are objective realities to music, to literature, to art. Certain music, like the music of Bach or Mozart or something, objectively speaking, it is more superior. And if somebody can't appreciate it, they don't objectively have as good a taste in music as somebody who can. It's maybe comfortable for people to hear that, but it's like comparing Bauhaus architecture of the Soviet Union, that style of stuff you see in Russia, Cuba, whatever. I think it started in Germany, but anyway, like that bland, whatever. You've seen this everywhere. That type of unhuman architecture. The reason why that took off in communist countries is because the souls of the communists were dead, and therefore their art was not life-giving. Their architecture was dead. Whereas you look at the Baroque civilization, you look at the Gothic civilization, when cultures are animated by life, the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus Christ, their architecture reflects the spirit of that life, and therefore it reaches up to heaven. Both literally, in the sense of tall cathedrals, and metaphorically in that when you are around it, your soul is exalted by the magnificence of what you see. If someone can't appreciate those things and doesn't desire those things over the banal things, if somebody desires Bauhaus communist apartment blocks over a little European village in Austria on the hillside, there's something seriously disordered in that person's soul. There's something wrong with them. And I guarantee you, if that person were to be immersed in beauty and to go to the sacraments and live in a state of grace and attend a traditional liturgy, I bet you their taste in architecture would literally change. I would bet my mortgage on it. So if your husband doesn't want to go to the traditional Mass and you're trying to wonder about subjection, submission, whatever, again, if going to the Novus Ordo is going to harm your faith, it is not within the realm of obedience in the true sense to do something that would harm your faith. At the same time, we have to look to St. Monica. Wives need to look to St. Monica for what to do when a husband won't lead them spiritually. And they can't compromise on their religious duties, but it cannot be the case that this is a cause of resentment, because the devil will sneak in either in the sense of getting you to compromise on what you know to be true, which will cause you to be in a state of despair, which is bad for your spiritual life, obviously, or he'll get in and give you a spirit of pride, really, of my husband is lesser than me. Whereas it should be like St. Monica, her husband objectively was wrong and he was a worse person than she was. But she never spoke ill of him and she never gossiped about him. And she served him faithfully, and she's why her husband was saved. Her behavior. Obviously as an instrument of God, but you know what I'm saying, a secondary cause. And once you've made that decision and you figure that out, then I would say the long game is try to introduce it, because I guarantee you there's going to be a problem. Does your husband play video games? That's a big problem, because video games are one of my big problem with video games. It is the ultimate. It is a form of dead, unreal entertainment. Compare sort of the idea of a man sitting down to play video games versus a man sitting down to play chess. There's a chasm of difference between, well, there's the isolation of video games with virtual reality, with chess as a real person, or compare a man sitting down to play video games versus a man sitting down to paint. Let's say there are various levels of reality that are skipped over to the point where you get into a state of unreality or virtual reality, which is damaging on the psychological makeup over a long period of time. In addition, there's just temptations in video games. They're also made to be addictive, etc. So the point is, if a man has a problem with video games, that's something you're going to have to really address. In the worst case scenario, you've got to find out, is this man living with grave sins habitually? Because I've seen it. I've seen men fall off the rails and start leaving the traditional mass, and it's because of sin. I've seen that. It's very sad when it happens, and it's hard to talk to them in that state because they become in a state of pride where they now start to rationalize to themselves why the Novus Ordo is just fine, when really it doesn't prick their conscience. And then also, if you're one of these women, and you yourself have this major feminist spirit in dealing with your husband, then that's going to create this disorder, and that's something you can handle on your own end at least as well. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, as always, let me know what you think in the comments. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.